Call this meeting to order of the Electoral Area Services Committee, Committee of the Comox Valley Regional District, order for Monday, July 13, 2020. And I'm going to read some opening remarks because of the extraordinary circumstances we now find ourselves under. Before we begin today, I wish to provide a brief statement respecting the protocols for this meeting. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, CVRD open meetings have been closed to the public for the past several months in accordance with provincial ministerial orders and in an effort to ensure the health and safety of the public, staff, and the directors. I'm pleased to advise that in-person attendance is once again permitted. Reopening of the corporate office and CVRD meetings has been carefully considered and informed through the development of the CVRD's COVID-19 safety plan and the orders and advice of the public health authorities. All visitors to the office will encounter new protocols and features aligned with the plan, including hand sanitizing upon entry of the building. As meetings are being recorded and live streamed to the CVRD's website, we encourage the public to continue to make use of these online opportunities. For those that attend in person, please note that physical distancing must be maintained, and the maximum meeting room capacity of 30 people will be strictly enforced. We also ask that you exit the civic room through the back doors to my left, next to the school board office, to reduce crowding in the hallways and in the lobby. We thank you for your patience and cooperation during these truly unprecedented times. A little bit of housekeeping for anybody in the gallery that's new to the building. Washrooms are just out the door, down the hall, and on the right. And should there be an emergency, there's exits, as you can see, to your right, and also, of course, where you came in, as well as the back exit in emergency. And the mustering point is in the back parking lot. Yes, behind the SD71 building. Okay, I also like to take this opportunity to recognize the fact that we are doing our business today on the traditional unceded territories of our Comox First Nation. First item of the day is number 1, Hornby Island Arts Council. There's a presentation here for receipt. A second on receipt. And we'll get you up on the screen.
Great. Should I go ahead?
Go ahead. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Can we go to the first slide if possible? Great. Thanks. And I'm going to go at a clip. So please, when I just say slide, you can move to the next one. So thank you all for seeing us today. Louise McMurray is awaiting the arrival of a grandchild, and she sends her best. And Rochelle Chinnery, a Hornby resident artist, will be speaking after me. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about what happened after you approved our gas tax request last year, how our public infrastructure project is proceeding, and then the need for a dependable municipal support for our island's art scene. Next slide. So 5 days after this committee's green light for $175,000 in gas tax funding, the federal government committed $375,000 to the Arts Center. Soon after, the BC Arts Council committed $25,000 and BC Gaming committed $250,000. All matching funding conditions were then met, confirming a $1.2 million cash budget. Here's a visual of that. Next slide. So you can see the gas tax grant represents about 14% of the funders that got on board. Next slide. So we have a proven ability then to bring funds into the CVRD from outside of it. 25,000 of our island's local tax-funded economic body combined with 175,000 in federally collected gas tax dollars, 60,000 in private donations, and 115,000 in auctioned artworks for 375,000 total, to bring in a further 825,000, a return of over twofold from outside the CVRD that would not otherwise be here because you funded us a year ago. Next slide. So on the Arts Center and how we're doing, we've hired our project manager and our architect, and things are going very well. We're in the final stages of design, permitting, and costing. We're set to break ground in November and complete by July 2021. The project is a positive focus through the pandemic for us and for our community. Next slide. So about the gas tax grant, we know it was challenging to open up the funds to a third party like ourselves. We know a lot of work was involved and will be involved in navigating the UBCM system. We also hope we've set a standard we can all be proud of for grassroots community infrastructure projects that seek to access these kinds of funds. And we thank you for that trust, and now we want to build on it. Next slide, please. So charitable nonprofits, like the CVRD, we exist to improve quality of life, and 85% of Canadians believe that the arts do this. Unlike the CVRD, we can use tax dollars to gather and multiply high returns for quality of life for people who live here using sources the CVRD simply cannot access. Slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. How do we leverage tax funding like we have with the Arts Center? We can offer charitable tax receipts for donations. We attract regional, provincial, and federal funds to the CVRD that are designated or preferred to go to nonprofits demonstrating excellence. We access volunteers and pro bono services, and comparatively speaking, we are administratively light and efficient. Next slide. So for example, when we are lucky to get a $2,500 CVRD grant and aid, and $2,500 from our island's economic body, the BC Arts Council will automatically match that 1-to-1. So that's a combined $10,000 that is used to deliver public good in the CVRD, a doubling. However, when nonprofit funders look at our financials and they also see an insecure average of $5,000 annually in municipal support, that tells them that our art scene isn't being taken very seriously in the tax structure. Next slide. We know that the balance of funding a public art body is advised to reach to achieve sustainability is 20%. Province-wide knowledgeable art service organizations like BC Alliance for Arts and Culture, Arts BC, and Creative BC research best fiscal practices and outcomes. We also know exactly what arts bodies in Courtney, Qualicum, Ladysmith, Duncan, and Salt Spring receive in guaranteed municipal support right now. And we receive less than half of the least funded in that group of local arts orgs, less than 5% of our annual budget. Next slide. So Salt Spring Island, with fewer artists than Hornby's, invests $114,000 into its art scene each year. Golden BC invests $160,000 into their local arts council. The Comox Valley Arts Council, with a $300,000 annual budget, receives $17,000 nominal downtown rent and a negotiated portion of the CVRD Arts and Culture levy that you directors have knowledge of. Next slide. So the Cowichan Valley Arts Council receives $19,000 a year in municipal support with a $100,000 annual budget, a pretty balanced scenario and a good analog for our situation. In 20 years, nothing has really changed for HIAC's municipal funding record. We get between $0 and $2,500 from the CVRD grant and aid funding, with the exception of this year, and about the same from our local economic body, HISEEK. Yet we have moved from a $30,000 budget to over $100,000 in the same time frame. And it looks like this over the last decade. Next slide. So there you go. That's the situation we're in right now. Next slide. The pitch, basically here, at $7.2 billion a year, BC's cultural economy is larger than accommodations and food services, larger than forestry, fisheries, and agriculture combined, and larger than utilities. Hornby Island has a very contentious relationship with tourism, development, and housing, but the arts have never proposed a growth for the sake of growth argument. The arts have never been about mere economic expansion. Next slide. The arts are embraced and celebrated as one of our defining social values on Hornby. They are also deeply so in environmental practice. It's not difficult to realize art on Hornby, as in most places, is all about the natural world and the island, all about memory, values, and social progress. The arts are Hornby's triple bottom line and then some. Next slide. So the Arts Center will produce its substantial promise of social, economic, and environmental progress if it can count on dedicated and meaningful municipal support. We already have families moving to Hornby, and we have artists relocating to Hornby because of the Arts Center. Opening the Arts Center in 2021 is going to support Hornby's culture in a time of great uncertainty. It is a rock in the unknown future. Next slide. The Arts Center will be a large, volunteer-driven indoor space open to the public year-round. Please understand, we don't have any space with those qualities on Hornby. Islanders face financial, time, transport, and numerous access barriers to public infrastructure, services, and programming not already on Hornby Island. The space will provide an essential public environment that will aid an imbalanced economy and a community with shuttered private spaces in winter. Our community with the highest taxes and rates of poverty in the CVRD need our tax dollars to stay on island and to be put to work. Life in August is nothing like life in February on Hornby Island. Next slide. So our ask here, the Arts Center will attract visitors from inside and outside the CVRD all year long. Those visitors will come for the day, the night, or the weekend and patronize businesses and visit our network of studios and all the region's businesses and artists. How will the CVRD plan to support the arts culture that will sustain the Arts Center? We are opening in 2021 and we need your ideas, recommendations, and solutions now. This needs to be made a priority while you are reviewing, auditing, planning, and reorganizing your budgets. Last slide for me. People on Hornby handle public needs with volunteerism and public tax dollars with incredible frugality and return on investment. We also absorb many costs of hosting the region's visitors. We need a guaranteed tax neutral solution to support Hornby's arts. And we are asking for your help and your staff's to help find one. This fall, we will retire our 1960s seasonal trailer, and planning the only newly constructed modern arts facility north of Nanaimo simply requires, right now, more from our municipality than we have been afforded in the past. We are asking you to bring the economic, you are asking you to bring the Economic Recovery Task Force's attention to what is going on with Hornby's art scene relative to the pandemic. Okay, I'm handing it over to Rochelle now.
Thank you. The fact that we're meeting here electronically is a perfect context to show how everything has changed in the world. On Hornby, what we're calling an art scene has changed radically because of the pandemic. But here and everywhere, people are immersed in the arts right now, whether they're aware of it or not. They're reading more books, watching more movies and shows, watching live concerts on the computer. They're sewing, knitting, and puzzle assembling. Everyone is engaged in some form of art. I'd like to highlight Hornby's unique situation in the arts with the pandemic. As you know, we are a remote rural community with a predominantly elderly population, but we also have a cohort of school-aged children whose school burned down almost 2 years ago. We also have a youth population with a precarious high school reentry pending. And we have many, many performing artists whose careers have been put indefinitely on hold. The way we see arts programming going forward, potentially going back into a stage 2 pandemic scenario, is like this. In the works right now on Hornby with CVRD support, we've adapted a new studio guide app that allows visitors to find artist galleries using their phones. Future features of the app will list online exhibitions, events, and concerts. This app will evolve into a full index of artists, studios, and events that visitors to the Art Center will be able to access from anywhere in the region and beyond. Last March, we had an international film festival that was due to screen 1 week after the pandemic was declared. We're thinking of screening the whole program at a drive-in at the local farm where our summer music festival happens. And by the way, that 40-year-old 10-day festival had to be canceled this year too. The fall fair is canceled, and going into winter, we know that we won't be having any seasonal gift shows or Christmas craft fairs anywhere in the region this year. But the Studio app will be able to reconfigure the Christmas fair, our Christmas fair, into an island studio tour, which will promote widely in the whole region as a safe distance experience to replace those dearly loved fairs. Additionally, online streaming concerts, Zoom workshops, e-commerce, and hosting sparse audience in-person events will be just a few of the ways we can put extra funding to good use. And if we've learned anything in the last 4 months, it's that planning for the future has to involve adaptability for situations we haven't even dreamed of yet. In closing, I'll just add that it's widely anticipated that going into winter, one of the strongest effects of the pandemic is going to be on our collective mental health, no matter where we are. We know that the arts are central to mitigating those effects, and we want to go into the coming months with solid plans and funding to make life just a little bit easier for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions from the directors? Director Hamir?
Great, thank you. And first of all, thank you to both of you for a fantastic presentation. I want to congratulate you for the incredible leveraging that you've done with the grant that we were able to give you. And that's just a true testament to your ingenuity and your ability to leverage the small amount of dollars that we were able to give you. I agree entirely that funding for the arts is incredibly important, especially in the time of COVID. I too have been puzzling and immersing myself in books and film. And I also agree that embedding arts into our economic recovery is going to be vitally important for us to build out in a way that, as you mentioned, has very few negative impacts. So if I could ask, I'm not sure who might be able to answer this. How do you see yourselves on that economic recovery task force? Have you been invited yet? Do you need to be invited? Are you on that task force yet, on the technical committee?
I participate, pardon me, I participate in that committee, and I'm liaising between the Arts Council and HiSeek and other groups on the island who are working towards that. We're just figuring it out. You know, it's also new. We're trying to figure out different ways of living. So we don't have answers just yet, but we're just trying to get through the summer while making some plans for the winter time. And as I said about the app, it's a studio guide, and it really is entering into the awareness of the general public right now. I've had people come to my studio with it. So it's new, but these things spread very quickly. And we're hoping that we can leverage that technology into kind of real life solutions, you know, plans.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering if our Comox Valley Economic Development Society has been able to promote that app. Has it showed up on any of their newsletters or their social media streams?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Dr. Arbor can answer that one.
Mhm.
I'm seeing a shaking of heads, so it sounds like maybe it hasn't been. I'm wondering for staff if we can direct something like that to happen. both through CVEDs, and do we have a spot on our own CVRD website that we can promote apps like this one? I think the Taste Comox Valley app is also up.
It's where you should be right on. No? Oh, no, something's going on. There it is.
You're
Sorry.
good.
Thanks very much. In answer to your question, with respect to CVEDs, I would encourage the group on Hornby to work directly with CVEDs. The regional district doesn't control the CVEDs. It's an independent society working in the interests of economic development. And with respect to our own abilities to promote the app, we'll look into that.
Great. I think if there's something else that I could also ask staff to do is to look at where there may be an ability to find some more funding for the arts. I know Hornby is a special case, but I think for our entire arts community, both on Hornby Denman, but also in the Comox Valley on this side, I just see such a big need and a positive benefit from funding the arts in general. And if this community works grant is quite specific, I think, to capital funding for infrastructure. But if we have some other sources of funding that could potentially be a little bit more flexible so that it doesn't necessarily have to be an infrastructure grant, it's going to be incredibly important for us coming into the winter time to invest heavily in our arts, and that's in my opinion. So thank you again to both of you for your great presentation.
Thank you.
Director Arbor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation to Hayek. In relation to Director Hamir's question, Hornby and Denman is a little bit like Cumberland. They are outside the CVED service. They have their own economic development functions, and I think those functions have been, well, the Hornby one has been supportive of Hayek in the past, and including with the Arts Center, and as was highlighted in the presentation. In terms of the requests from this group, which obviously we don't consider at the same meeting, we can ask staff for more questions. There's just a few avenues that could be contemplated. One is through the existing economic development function. I understand they're about to redo their 5 years plan. So that's an existing function. For some, we are supposed to be reviewing the arts function for the Comox Valley, but I do believe that Hornby and Denman are excluded from that function. But that could be an avenue for the Arts Council and Hornby and Denman to join that function potentially. And then the third option, if the goal is to get stable funding, would be through its own service. If they didn't think that the ECDEV or joining the Water Valley ones were viable, and that would necessitate electoral assent. So there's a few pathways, I think, for the group to consider, and it would be great indeed if staff could work with Hayek, particularly as we're completing that arts review across the Comox Valley to see what the possibilities could be. And I did like the one of the lines to try to make it tax neutral. That's always a good thing. So I'd be quite looking forward to see how we can support. And where I do agree is, with this new arts center, the organization will look quite a bit different, and the expectations around it and the operations and all that. So I can see why they're coming before our board today. So unless staff has any, if my general request to kind of look into this and with Hayek over the next few months around those three options, that would be great. And then there's just a level for Hayek itself. My feedback would be, I think you had highlighted some numbers in your business plan that you presented to us last year around what funding could look like. But if you, the more detailed and comprehensive you are around the resources that you would like to see considered, the better. So that's my feedback. Thank you so much.
Director Hamir.
Thank you. I am just wondering about Director Arbor's comments of including, you know, including funding into a service, if that's necessarily the way that it has to be. I'm thinking about the funding that we give the Farmers Market Society. It's a budget item, if I recall, but I don't think we had to go through electoral assent for that. Is there something similar that we could do for that?
Can I speak to it quickly? The easiest path, in my opinion, is the ECDF function, which has a lot of room in it, but this would necessitate the support of HiSeq and the public in general to look at that. That's probably the easiest path if it's supported. But otherwise, unless staff corrects me, it's hard to send reliable money from year to year for something that is not within a service. And outside the ECDF function on the island, I don't believe we have anything other than joining the broader arts one across the valley. We're not going to put it in parks or in, you know, in some of those other, the fire hall. Although maybe Rochelle could arrange that for a dinner conversation, but that's another matter.
Well, I think Director Arbor touched on a very important piece, and that's that it's a mystery to many of our residents the way regional districts finance their functions or services, and everything's very much in its own silo. So unless you're actually part of the function, we don't have, you know, just a ready pot of money that we can hand out to any worthy organization. We're very limited in that if we want to channel money through a large organization, and you mentioned Comox Valley Economic Development, and we do give out our art and culture, which I understand is on the back burner right now, but slated for some review. That strictly comes from the electoral areas. And right now, I do believe, like we said, that Denman and Hornby are exempt. So they're not paying into that function. So they obviously can't benefit from that function. My question to the presenters is that you mentioned the Comox Valley Arts Council. So is your organization integrated with it? Are members also members of that Arts Council? Are you operating independently?
I can speak to a few different things if that's okay. So we're independent of that. We work with them in partnership on a few different things, but we are independent of them. In thinking about, you know, the options in front of us, it would seem to us that at this time, our community is not prepared to add a new tax service or to join the grant that goes to the arts in the CVRD. You know, presently, as I mentioned, our taxes are super high, and we also, you know, do have the highest rates of poverty, and so there's that gap right now. Just seems infeasible to create that. So going through HiSeq would be a possibility. There's also a heritage line that's interesting to me in our budgets. And I always wonder what the heritage funding goes to. Certainly arts and culture and heritage often go together. We forwarded you a letter of support from HiSeq for our request generally. So, you know, we are in conversation with, and they are supportive of our presentation today. And, you know, I suppose the easy thing would be to, you know, prorogue this or say, okay, well, we'll get to this, And the thing is that we're going to be opening next year, and we have to start planning now. And as Director Arbor pointed towards, it's not just a trailer in the woods that we're replacing. We are replacing our website. We are replacing our governance. We're replacing our policy. The expectations for a brand new $1.2 million arts facility have very little in common with expectations for a seasonal summer trailer. So these are the kinds of needs that we have. And I guess my last point would be, I would ask staff to look at the tax dollars that go to support infrastructure, services, and programming in the CVRD that Hornby Islanders face access barriers to, and see if those couldn't be recouped or brought back to Hornby. I think that's it.
Not to belabor the point, but you have to realize when you look at the back of your tax notice, it's very specific where the money goes.
Yeah.
So unless there's a line item there, there's no way of getting funding through taxation. So either we have to, roll it into a bigger piece with partners,
right,
or else it's pretty well standalone. Because as I say, we don't have petty cash.
Right.
It's very specific.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I would point to, for example, I know HiSeek is working on seeing that transportation dollars that go to the CVRD can be used for transportation needs on Hornby. So I'm speaking to those kinds of specific scenarios where, that are out there where Hornby Island dollars leave to support specific functions in town that maybe we don't utilize that well, or we have access barriers to utilizing. Thanks.
Okay, I see no further questions. I thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll take a vote on receipt. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 2, Hornby Island Community Economic Enhancement Corporation Broadband Initiative. Report for receipt, or a presentation for receipt.
Mr. Chair, sorry, just before moving on, did the committee wish to ask for a staff report that works with the group to bring forward options for your consideration at a later date?
I would move that. Thank you.
Any discussion on that? All in favor? Thank you. Now on to 2. John Grayson, Karen Ross, Peter Spur, Hornby Island Community Economic Enhancement Corporation present. Welcome.
Thank you. Is there a switch here? Or should I use this? Okay. So first of all, can you understand what I'm saying? Okay, great. This is my first experience using an N95 mask. So you have our briefing in front of you, and rather than just read through it, I'll just give you a quick summary. Late June, the federal government, in cooperation with the provincial government, designated a almost $59 million fund to help finance rural development, and in particular, broadband development. And they do have a focus on communities that have a population of less than 5,000, whereby they will grant typically about $2 million toward a broadband project, for example, per community. So that would mean if this application was successful, Hornby would get 2 million, Denman Island would get 2 million, and any other community within the Comox Regional District that is desperate for broadband connectivity could also apply for this. The key point is that this application must be made by the CVRD. It must go through the CVRD. Now, we over on Hornby, and by the way, I should introduce my role in the Hornby Island Economic Enhancement Corporation. I'm the vice chair, and my major and only portfolio is broadband internet. So both Hornby and Denman have been working very hard over the last 18 months to produce and, well, first of all, to hire professionals to produce at a cost of $50,000, a complete integrated report that shows how to put in fiber optic connectivity to every household and business on both islands. And it is a report that is, as you call it, shovel ready. Every detail has been worked out. So what we're asking is basically that you support this grant application, and if need be, direct staff to participate in this. We will provide as much technical information in terms of the filling out of this grant application. And as well, it should be noted that this is a application per island. So we will do the Hornby part, and Denman and their group would have to do the Hornby application should they decide to apply for this potential $2 million contribution. And then finally, we would like you to investigate opportunities for funding the balance of these projects, which total $5 million per island, either through acquiring a municipal bond or some similar financial instrument. Thank you very much, and I'm sure my other colleagues may have comments to make.
Thank you. We have somebody online, do we? No?
Hello, Edmund. It's Karen Ross coming in on Zoom. I'm the Economic Enhancement Officer for HiSeek, and I have been working with John Grayson and the Denman Island Internet Committee over the last 18 months, doing an intensive public consultation and working with the consulting company that we hired through contacts through the Strathcona Regional District and their Coastal Connect project. We've been linking and liaisoning throughout the industry and the BC to try to find how to get this project off the ground. As we just heard in the Arts Council presentation, this is the way of the future. The Arts Council is talking about an app to be used on Hornby to guide people through the tour, through their studio tour. And that app is fantastic. And I'm very supportive of the project that HIAC is doing and the presentation they made to this morning to the EASC. But the reality of internet on Hornby is that there are some areas that have extremely substandard internet, in some cases below 5 megabytes per second download, and nothing that approaches the Canadian standard that Prime Minister Trudeau declared was a basic right for Canadians, which is 50 megabyte download and 10 megabit upload. And there is nowhere on Denman or Hornby that has anything like even half of that. So it's like the telephone or hydro. We're being left behind on the islands because our primary service provider, TELUS, has told us that they will not upgrade our antiquated copper wiring infrastructure in the foreseeable future. So this is a huge project for us to get into the 21st century with. And we really appreciate that the staff has supported an application to the Northern Development Initiative Trust, which was a requirement of the province of BC for funding that $50,000 consultation reports. ICE-T was a direct application through HiSeek, and the NDIT application was a collaboration that we very much appreciated CVRD staff expedited for us. So this provincial and federal money requires our local government to act as our representatives. And that's what we're now asking the regional district, is if we could have staff time and resources to try to bring the islands along with the rest of the CVRD, which is serviced by traditional ISPs, internet service providers, and not to leave us out. Thank you, Edmund.
Thank you. Does Rachel have something to add? I see she's online there.
Rochelle is not part of our delegation. I think she's still on the line from the Hayek.
Okay, good to know. I'm just looking at the prompts here. And Director Arbor, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the presentation, John and Karen. A very worthwhile project. And I'm glad. I mean, it doesn't seem like that long ago that you guys came for assistance in sponsoring the application. And it's nice to see the project move forward. I attended one of the consultation session. It was a packed room at New Horizons. There was probably 60 people there, a lot of support for the project. So if my understanding is correct, as the CVRD did last time, you need the application for the 2 million to be sponsored by the regional district for the actual infrastructure component. And in my question to staff, I understand last time it was not, the way it worked is the partners had done a lot of the work in building the application, and the CVRD basically had to review it and a little bit of staff time. So maybe it's a question to both staff and to our delegation is, would it be a similar scenario where the local organizations would do the bulk of the work and CVRD would have to basically look at sponsoring the application, do the review and submit the application?
That's correct.
Okay, so I would be supportive to put in a request for staff to consider the request and see what would be the implications of the CVRD moving that way. And there was a second component to Mr. Grayson's presentation was on the municipal bond. And for that, I think probably a conversation with our CAO and the delegation to understand opportunities around that or not might be a good avenue. But I would focus on the application first for the 2 million to see if how much work is involved in all these different things. But we did support them moving forward with the strategy, which they now have. And now they're going to chase the infrastructure dollar. So it seems to make sense to me if it's not too onerous on our organization.
Mr. Chair, first I wish to acknowledge the group and coming forward and the great work that they've done, and also acknowledge that the frustration it is for residents that live in our rural communities that don't have good access, and especially over these last few months where work and school are have to be performed by home, we realize that the needs are even greater. Also like to acknowledge, as mentioned, the commitment of senior levels of government to create a standard yet not provide full funding to achieve that, and the difficulty it places us all in. What I would like to suggest on this is that to ask staff maybe to turn around and bring back a report at the next EASC with respect to the implications of this ask. Unfortunately, this funding stream has a lot of other opportunities that we are reviewing with respect to your priorities, with respect to your projects that you have on the go for the services that you are currently providing. Yes, the application can, or a regional district can make various applications representing different communities, but we can't expect that a regional district would necessarily receive many funding and would probably be limited in terms of the number of grants it will have. So there is that unintended consequence that we may be faced with other demands for this grant proposal. The other thing is that on a tertiary look at the funding requirements or the grant applicant requirements, and this is something we'll look at in more detail. It seems to me that you do have to demonstrate or prove where the rest of the funding is coming from over and beyond that which would be provided for the grant. I don't know that we could accomplish that analysis or having in place those mechanisms to demonstrate that in the way that most grant applications require, but our staff would review the criteria of the specific grant and just inform you of that and other potential competing interests for the grant program if you ask for a report from us.
Director Arthur?
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And I have to say I did not review the grant channel for it, so I didn't know if it was specific to internet or broader to other services. So that's that's to be looked at. My request would be that staff works closely with High Seek on before submitting the report, because there might be a range of avenues. We saw how Strathcona Regional District pretty much established a new service, for the Connected Coast project. So even if it's broad brush, I would like to if it's possible in the staff report to lay out a range of different options with their limitations and opportunities attached to it. That would be great. I do agree. I think it's the level of finances resources was, as I recall, close to $10 million or something like that, in that range, as I recall from the report.
Island.
5 million per island. Okay.
And with this ask, the structure can be basically self-financed for the balance of 3 million for each island.
Right.
And we have detailed financial analyses on these issues. But I agree with Director Arbor that the first and foremost objective would be to make this application, because we have a deadline of October 22nd.
Okay. Okay, so balancing that, maybe, so if we get a report by August, that still leaves a couple months. So for us, we can consider how the partnership could develop. And I understand between the lines the competing applications that we always have to wrestle with, and you probably sometimes even between departments at the regional district as to who can apply or should apply. So so that can be part of the mix as well. So thank you so much for all your work on this, completing this project, and hopefully we'll be able to look at something in the near future around options. Does that sound fair, CEO? Or okay, thank you.
Director Hamir, you had a question?
It was just answered. I was interested in what the deadline was and what the timing was. So yeah, so that's been answered, and I hope staff are able to come up with a list, because I'd be interested to see what all the other projects are, and hopefully we can balance all of this together. Thanks.
Yeah, I have much the same situation on the west side of the Solom River, Piercy Road, Dove Creek, all that area there. The residents have been trying to get something started for internet out there. And of course, nothing can really compel a private company if they don't see a business case to run the cable. Again, there's, even with some grant funding, we were still looking at horrendous costs per hookup for those long driveways in. But it's definitely had its toll over this, the last few months with kids at home and whatnot, and people working remotely. It's been quite a challenge. And, I'm certainly in favor of whatever you can do to bring some form of 21st century internet connectivity to the outlying areas, whatever that takes. So we're still on receipt. Anything else on receipt? Call the question on receipt. All in favor? And Director Arbor?
Requested action to bring back a staff report on options for the August meeting, if possible. Hornby, yeah. Hornby got a lot of good attention today and good projects, so that's great.
Thank you, directors, and we will, of course, provide as much assistance without any hesitation as possible, because we truly believe that connecting families, medical services to the modern century is really important for the overall health and productivity of all of our citizens, and will be the new norm coming into the future. So as an aside, I'm going to leave for the directors a complimentary bottle of our Hornby hand sanitizer, which we manufacture on Hornby. It is the liquid formula, WHO approved, that really penetrates every little crook and cranny on your hands. So enjoy, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Okay, then we'll just vote on the staff report. All in favor? That carries. Okay, moving on. We have a management report for receipt. Any questions or discussion on the management report? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? That carries. Now, on to the minutes of the advisory planning commissions. Somebody wants to move them? Move both? Okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor? That carries. Number 2, Electoral Area B Development Variance Permit, 1B20136 Croto Road, report for receipt. And second on receipt. And over to CAO, introductions.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Dylan Thiessen, our planner, is here to present the report and introduce the applicant and answer any of your questions.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you in person this time. The applicant for this development variance permit has an accessory building that they would like to convert into a secondary dwelling. In order to have a residential use, however, the accessory building must meet the same setbacks as a primary residence, which are 7.5 meters from the front and rear lot lines. The building currently is 1.94 meters from the rear lot line, necessitating a reduction of 5.6 meters in the setback. With respect to the eaves, which are allowed a more lenient setback per section 403, subsection 1 of the zoning bylaw, the variance sought is a reduction of 4.2 meters from 5.5 to 1.3 meters. The Advisory Planning Commission voted in their June meeting 4-2 to not support the application, listing their reasoning as the fact that the property is small in size, so a large variance and a subsequent change of owners could have other impacts. Staff are in support of the application for numerous reasons outlined in more detail in the staff report. Generally, though, staff considered the applicant's willingness to agree to certain conditions regarding buffering, the fact that this potential residence will remain at just 1 story tall, and that the addition of a smaller secondary dwelling can work toward housing goals as outlined in the regional growth strategy. Staff solicited feedback from all property owners within a 100-meter radius of the subject property and have received correspondence from 4. The adjacent property owner to the south, whose property borders on the corner on which the accessory building is located, has no objections to the variance being granted. The adjacent property owners to the north and east, as well as a third property owner further to the east, wrote in to oppose the variance, most of their concerns having to do with the size of the variance relative to the size of the property, the proximity of the accessory building to the property at the rear, and potential servicing limitations. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Okay, questions from the directors? Director Hamir?
Great, thank you, and thank you for the report. So knowing the neighborhood where there is quite tight spacing between properties, and the water is through wells and through septics. I'm assuming an application like this doesn't have to be vetted by Island Health. It's how around the water and septic issue, how is that being looked at?
It certainly would be looked at through Island Health for the most part. Should this variance be approved, a building permit would be required in order for that accessory dwelling or accessory building to gain residential tenancy. And part of that building permit process, which again is required even if no changes are made to the structure, they will need to get their septic tank approved for secondary dwelling use by Vancouver Island Health Authority, and both the IHA as well as BC Ministry are involved in the well process.
Okay. I have a question because I was not able to attend the Area B committee. Regarding subsequent land ownership, would you be able to go into a little bit more detail about what the committee's, what their concerns were around that?
Certainly. The applicant, Brenda Killam, currently does not live full-time on the property, and she used this to help kind of justify her cause in terms of why a secondary dwelling wouldn't be a huge problem on the property right now. The APC members were concerned that the variance would, of course, be attached to the property even in the future decades going forward when the property may change hands. So if her family decides to change plans in terms of their living situation, or if they sell the property and then does live there full time. Their concern was having 2 full-time residences on the property.
Okay, and so with the Island Health and if the development permit, they would be assuming that both homes would be occupied when they're doing their calculations for water and septic?
They would be, yeah.
Okay. I do have one more, sorry, just further. In our bylaws, do we have anything regarding the percentage of change to setbacks versus the size of the property? Is that ever a consideration?
It certainly is a consideration that we make in our analysis, but there is no rule written down in the way that there is for lot coverage, for example, in terms of maximum variance that can be sought based on the size of the property.
Okay, so I guess we can receive at this point, and we'll go on to the correspondence. We have somebody waiting online. So on receipt, all in favor of receipt, that carries. And we have Brenda online, I believe.
Yes, this is Brenda here, and I have my adult daughter, Eliza Killam, here with me as well.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Okay. So you wanted to make comment on the application?
Yes, I could make comment. My property is zoned CR1, which allows for a secondary dwelling. Variance would allow for the already built compliant accessory building to be used as that secondary dwelling. The variance would allow for a change in purpose to the 15-year-old existing building, not a change in impact to the surrounding properties. I am willing to do everything that is required to follow the rules and regulations. I am happy to get another inspection for the well and septic, and I will comply with all of their recommendations. The building has no negative impact on the forest behind it, nor the neighboring properties. There will be no further construction to the building that could disturb the forest or neighboring properties. The entrance of the building, the parking, and all usable areas are on the front side of it. The building is not visible from the neighboring properties. A tall, dense hedge completely hides the building from our neighbors to the north and south, and it does not obstruct anyone's view or adversely affect the use and enjoyment of their properties. Like Dylan said, no one has been, well, partly said this, but no one has been living full-time in our house for 12 years. My family lives out of town, and I am now living in Victoria and come home to do the yard work on the weekends. It would be beneficial to the neighborhood to have a permanent resident living on our property who also shares in the pride and respect for our forests and this peaceful neighborhood. And converting the accessory building into a secondary dwelling could provide a home for someone who is unable to access the housing market, or for a senior or a young professional. Thank you very much for your time and for considering this application.
Thank you very much for phoning in.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. So we'll start by receiving those comments. Kick it off. All in favor? Carries. And we have correspondence from Peter and Patricia Baker for receipt. All in favor? That carries. And Robert White, comments for receipt. Moved and seconded. All in favor? That carries. And Lorraine Atkin for receipt. All in favor? That carries. And Corinne Solinsky. Moved and second on receipt. On that, call the question. It's carried as well. So the addendum is, there's nothing in the addendum. So that we've received everything, and that brings us to the recommendation. Move second on the recommendation.
Sorry, I just want to confirm with staff that that CR1 fund zoning does allow for a second dwelling.
Yes, it does. Limited to 90 square meters in size.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and insofar as issues around wells and septic, that's not our bailiwick anyway. It has to be Ireland Health to look into that.
If I could just make a comment, because I know this will be on record of, why I'm supporting instead of the comments or the recommendations of our area B committee. I do cite that the neighbor just adjacent is supportive. Looking at the property, because it does allow for a second dwelling already, to me, it doesn't make sense to knock down, an already existing accessory building and build a new one within the setbacks. It just makes more sense to convert what's there. So that's the reason that I am supporting this, despite the Area B APC's recommendation.
That's noted. Any other questions? So we come to the recommendation. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Number 3, Electoral Area C rezoning 2491 Emerson Road, sturdy construction. A report for receipt. Move to second on receipt and over to CEO for introductions.
Thank you very much. And Ton True will lead you through the staff report on this and introduce the applicant for comments or questions.
Thank you, Russell. Good morning, directors. To the chair and directors, I'd like to introduce the applicant, George Weeb. He's just sitting across from me. This committee may recall this zoning amendment application that was presented to this committee back in February 2020 for external agency referral. This proposal is to rezone the property to a zone that would allow it to be subdivided into 2 residential properties. External referrals were sent out in March with no objections received or concerns that have been identified. The OCP designated this area as settlement nodes, which encourage residential intensification, provided it is in keeping with their existing neighborhood character and is appropriately serviced. The LGA allows for waiving a public hearing in cases where a zoning amendment is consistent with the OCP. As this is the case here, staff is recommending that the draft bylaw be given first and second reading and that the public hearing be waived. The LG still requires public notification of the proposed zoning amendment through mail notices and newspaper ads. Any correspondence will have to be received prior to consideration of third reading. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Don. And George, you feel up to answering a few questions or good? Just press a little button there on your mic. Any questions of the applicant? Well, it's area C, so I have to ask one. So how did you manage to find a section like that? That's quite a piece you got there. So I know I was at the APC meeting when you presented it, and it seemed to be supportable. So,
well, I guess it's kind of my brother's fault. He's on a private client listing with the realtor with a realtor friend, and he got a notification that this was coming up for sale before the sign went up. So he gave me a quick call, and we did like a late night view, early morning view, and then we liked it and put an offer in. The, on page 12 of the application, just Ton, a quick question for you now. I see the shaded yellow area within the red lines of the complete property. Lot size, is that something that we are probably not discussing today, right? That's not first and second, are we? I was just wondering if that could be revisited. The thought is that now I speak in acres, so I'm not very familiar with hectares, but it is just over 3 acres, and I had hoped that we could approach this subdivision on a 1/3, 2/3 fraction, so that in the future, when the water service does get upgraded, that 2/3 could again be applied for rezoning and then split off again once the water service supports that kind of plan. So it looks like we've shaded it down the middle now to make 2 equal lots, but I'd hope for a 1/3, 2/3 fraction with still being subject to 1 dwelling per lot only, but it would change the minimum, like the 1.2 hectare min max on the single dwelling per property because of the water service restriction at this point.
Ton, you want to give it a crack?
Sure. To the chair, to the applicant. So this application is the focusing on the zoning amendment for this to use through subdivision, and through the next steps we can have a further discussion on on that size.
Okay, yeah, I just wasn't sure if I could bring that up today or not, so that's fine.
Again, subdivision isn't our bailiwick.
Well, pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Sir?
Sorry, I missed your comment there.
Oh, just muffling something in my mouth. Don't worry about me. Very good. So I see no further questions around the table. So excuse the applicant from the table. We'll take a vote on receipt. On receipt, all in favor? And that carries. And recommendation? Seconded. Any discussion on the recommendation? Call the question on that. All in favor? And that also carries. Now, a little bit of light reading. If you have 500 pages to devour over a weekend while you're mowing the lawn, we have final housing needs assessment, electoral areas, report for receipt.
But what a great use of paper, all the information provided in those 500 pages.
Luckily, it was e-pages.
And Alana Mullally is here to present the report to you and provide a summary, as well as answer any of your questions.
Great.
Hi, Alana.
Thanks very much, Russell. Through the chair to the directors, you're right. What a colossal volume of information and data that we now have. And not just because I'm a planner, I'm really excited that we have all of this data. So over the coming months, staff will be working our way through it. But today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the findings of the electoral area reports. You'll recall that one of the products of this project is a specific report for each community, and then an overall regional profile. So the project is at its near end. As I say, these are the final reports for the electoral areas. We've presented the final reports to Courtenay and Cumberland councils. You'll be seeing the regional report tomorrow at the board meeting, and then Comox will be receiving their final report on Wednesday. So as you know, these reports show us what is happening in respect to population, our economy, and our housing. And they show us who it is happening to. The reports don't speak to the how, or how we go about addressing the gaps that are identified. Rather, that is conversation that will follow in some of our upcoming work. So as I say, we're the happy recipients of a wealth of data broken down by electoral area, which I think each of you will appreciate is really unique, because usually what we receive in the electoral areas is aggregated data, which can present challenges in thinking about policy. A key caveat in this respect, however, would be the rental data that's provided by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. There's no CMHC rental market data in communities with fewer than 10,000 residents. So Courtenay and Comox have been extrapolated for some of the data pieces in the reports. As you might guess, the Comox Valley's housing market is absolutely integrated. We see rural residents moving back and forth between the rural areas and the municipalities for work, and therefore it's not surprising that our regional housing market is similarly configured. This, of course, is important to bear in mind as we look at overall demand within the region. Residents will move within the region for affordability, access to alternative housing types, and access to services. So consider, for example, that an apparent surplus of units in one area does not mean that those units will sit vacant. Our residents will move to access those units. Some of the key findings that I'd like to highlight for you today, beginning with population. We are growing steadily, not quickly. Our electoral areas are projected to add about 215 people net by 2025. So our direct growth is marginal. New growth is primarily occurring in the municipalities, which of course is one of the key growth management objectives of the regional growth strategy. Area A continues to have the highest median age at 56.2 versus 54.8 in Area B and 52.2 in Area C. And that, of course, our numbers are greater than the median for the province, which come in at 42.5 years old. Our projected median age, we're just going to keep on aging, thankfully. So in 2025, we're looking at Area C remaining about the same, 56.7 in Area A and 55.9 in Area B. These numbers are important when we think about our dependency ratio, and that is the number of working age residents relative to the ability of our citizens to pay for future services and expansions to those services relative to their working age. In respect to household income, I'm going to be talking in medians today, not averages. I think you can appreciate why we do that, and that, for those perhaps seeing this report, the median shows us the midpoint, which eliminates those outliers at either end of the spectrum that get factored into an average. So a median at the midpoint is a much more telling number for us. Median income for owner households in electoral areas B and C is higher than it is in the municipalities, but it is lower than the local median in Area A. All three electoral areas have a higher median than the provincial median. But the picture changes quite starkly when we look at renter households. Renter households earn about half of what owner households earn, and they are significantly lower earners than the provincial median. Renter households in Area B have the highest median annual income at $46,782, followed by renter households in Area C at $41,991. And finally, in Area A, renter households have a median income of $40,444. So there is significant disparity between our owner households and our renter households in the electoral areas. And our rental market is tight. Again, recalling that CMHC data, we've looked at a vacancy rate right across the region. It's not broken down, but because of the fluidity of our regional market, I think it's still salient for us. We have in 2020 to date a 1.3% vacancy rate. Just as a reminder, the vacancy rate is looking at the primary rental market. So that's purpose-built rental housing, and it looks at the percentage of all available units at a given point. So right across Canada, vacancy rates are at an all-time low. So we can learn from this that it's important to protect our existing stock and to create opportunities for the development of more primary or purpose-built rental. And this is something that we are seeing in the region in the last couple of years in particular, particularly in the city of Courtenay, with more purpose-built rental initiatives coming on stream. So in terms of how demographics and income equate to trends in our rural areas, as I've said, our rural population is aging, and seniors may be unable to leave their larger homes, in turn keeping them restricted or constricted and not freeing them up for younger families with children. Seniors may be staying in those larger homes because of affordability challenges elsewhere in the market, or a lack of stock in other smaller dwelling types. Residents who remain in their homes that exceed their needs and may exceed over time their ability to maintain and access the services that they need in order to remain independent. The most significant type of core housing need, you'll remember core housing need is about affordability, adequacy, so that's like the state of repair, and suitability, meaning that there are an appropriate number of bedrooms to house the members of the household. So the most significant type of core housing that we see across our electoral areas is affordability. Renters, as you might guess, given that disparity in income, are much more likely to be in core housing need than owner households. Renter households have fewer alternatives than owner households. This is particularly true in the rural areas where the majority of our stock is in the form of single detached dwellings. So comparatively more true that they're facing these crunches in the electoral areas versus the municipalities. And ultimately, we have a lack or almost a non-existence of primary built rental in the rural areas, which I have to say isn't altogether unusual given the size of our communities. You typically don't see purpose-built rental until you start to get into population sizes greater than 10,000 residents. But in any case, we rely on a secondary rental market. So those would be the secondary suites, carriage houses, and second dwellings. The secondary rental market is a critical component of addressing our housing needs in the electoral areas, but it is important to remember that these units can move back and forth between renter and owner occupancy much more fluidly than the primary rental market. So it is there, it is important, but it is fluid. Renter households in the electoral areas are experiencing worsening rates of affordability. And that's an increase in households that are paying more than 30% of their household income on shelter. And those are those households that are paying more based on necessity, so based on income rather than based on choice. We might see certainly residents in the rural areas paying more than 30% based on choice because of a desire to live in a particular area or proximal to services. In respect to housing sale prices, the average sale prices of all dwelling types in the electoral areas was generally stable for the first half of the past 10 years, with significant increases observed in 2016 onwards. Just the overall price in 2019 was 36% higher than the 2010 to 2016 average, and certainly we didn't see incomes rise to that degree. So some of the key takeaways, I've moved through this pretty quickly. You might have a number of questions, which I'd be happy to address, but some of the key takeaways are that renter households are especially vulnerable in the rural areas. And it's important to note that most of the growth in rural households in Area C are families with children. Rural areas are experiencing high rates of hidden homelessness and potentially the increase of illegal suites as residents become more and more challenged to meet their household's shelter needs. We know one of the things we know about housing, particularly in the rural areas, is that access to reliable transportation is key to overall household affordability. And as access to reliable transportation decreases, people are even more challenged living in the rural areas to access work, school, services. Generally, we have enough housing being constructed in the electoral areas to meet our projected population, to absorb that net increase of 215 people to 2025. But we don't necessarily have the stock to meet household needs in respect to our aging population and the size of the houses that are being built in the rural areas, as well as the affordability, so the price points at which that housing is coming in. Next steps, in terms of this project, as I mentioned, we've done the presentations to Courtney and Cumberland. Tomorrow night, you'll see the regional report. Comox receives theirs on Wednesday. And then we're just planning our community housing forum, which we're moving to an online platform. I'm just firming up the dates, but we're looking within the first 2 weeks in August, likely August 12th, but I'll firm that up and you'll get an invitation. In terms of implementing the findings of this project, a key implementation item will be our poverty reduction strategy work that we're just scoping that project now. That project will focus on children, youth, and families, social supports, and affordable housing, including transportation and food security. This strategy will, among other goals, identify the Comox Valley specific game changers in reducing poverty, So those are those actions that we can take to produce benefits that will cascade into many areas. The report will outline actions by sector in the context of those local game changers that will move the Comox Valley towards the provincial reduction target of 25% by 2024 and by 50% for children by 2024. Longer term, we will use these reports as we make recommendations to you about development applications, about updates to our official community plan, and to our regional growth strategy. Thank you very much.
Way to summarize. And Director Mir, question?
Thanks, Alana. And thank you, Chair. That was a great summary, and just for me highlighted the complexity of the issue in relation to transportation, as you mentioned, and where our housing is, especially the rentals. And I also just want to bring up our lack of childcare as well, as was highlighted by the childcare report in the rural areas specifically. So I'm interested to hear, and I know you're working on this, what we in the electoral areas can do to encourage affordability, trying to reduce the number of illegal suites, bring them online into a more permanent sort of situation, have staff put their minds as to what sort of ways that we can bring that about. Are there any levers that we have? Changes of zoning, is that all going to be coming up later?
Through the chair to the directors, thank you, Director Humir. I think some of the low-hanging fruit that we can do around secondary dwelling units is public outreach and education. Ton and I and Scott have talked over the last many months as this has been coming in about workshops, for example, that we could do with residents who may be in the rural areas, suggesting that they want to age in place, but knowing that that house is becoming too large for them, both their physical needs as well as their ability to maintain. So for example, perhaps we consider doing workshops. How do you develop a secondary suite on your property? Those kinds of pieces to encourage. We have enabling policy in place. You've set those pieces in motion. You've set the right conditions for this to happen. Our zoning is permissive. We're very proud of our zoning. The fact that since 2005, we've enabled secondary dwelling units on almost every residentially zoned property outside the ALR. So you've set the conditions. And now probably it's about tapping into our residents to find out what kind of barriers they might either face or perceive in terms of creating more.
That would be great. Yeah.
And then I do think, this data is really important for us as we get development applications coming across your table so that you can think about, we might have development proponents who are keen to address the needs. So hopefully our hope would be that we would have development proponents referring to these reports as well and designing projects that will be more tailored to our specific conditions.
Yeah. Do you see anything on the books that is preventing the purpose-built rentals? Is because I know Area C has a few rental areas where there's a sort of apartment-like complexes, but I don't see many in Area B.
Through the chair to the directors, I think that primary built rental, we're going to see that mostly in the municipalities. One important thing to remember is that because our regional market is so integrated, we don't each individually have to be all things to all people. So sort of focus where our strengths are. The one thing that I didn't mention in my presentation was that to date, the market has not done, and I don't know if it's the role of the private market, but the private market hasn't filled the needs that we have in respect to non-market housing. And that's where a lot of our need rests. So I think, the partnerships that we have with the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, endorsing those projects. Again, I think that's setting the right conditions to see more development of non-market affordable housing, which certainly is a gap.
Thank you.
Yes, I seem to remember budget time building services saying that they're actually inspecting more new secondary dwellings than they are primary right now. So that's quite a switch in itself. And I know in my neighborhood, I've seen quite a few modular homes come in, and they're usually for the daughter and the son-in-law kind of thing. So keeping the kids there too. Anything from Director Arbor? It's, no.
Yeah, thank you. Nothing. I think, as the staff said, this will this is a lot of data to absorb and will inform our policies in the future. But overall, you know, when I think of Area A with the older age demographic than the rest of the Comox Valley, it still doesn't mean that the state we have is necessarily the state of the future. You see a lot of appetite from young families moving in these communities, and expectations change a little bit. They do want to live green and live locally in their own communities. And as Director Amir said, childcare, some sort of affordable housing in those communities so that there's diverse structure, not just bedroom communities for retirees. I do hear that a lot, you know, around Union Bay, even Fanny Bay, Royston. So it all fits together. But yeah, the only one I was looking at while you were talking, we didn't dive much into, was the vacation rental, because that was a topic last time we talked about. So I was just reviewing. I think they just updated a couple things in there since we saw the draft, and yeah, I guess it'll probably be the object of future conversations around any impact or both positive and negative in the rural areas. And it does seem to be, in comparison to rentals, not an insignificant factor. So I'll rectify what I had said from the report. I think the numbers, either I misread them at the time or reread them in a different fashion this time. So maybe it'll be interesting to have some discussions around that in the future as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's a lot of incredible data in there. My only concern, of course, is the fact that with the 2016 census, where I was operating, you know, 4 years behind the database we've got. Are they going ahead? I don't know. Maybe someone tell me. Are they going ahead with the 2020 census? Usually it's August they do it. Is the feds, any word on that?
Through the chair to the directors. So the next census will be 2021. And so we would typically start seeing results.
2021.
Yeah, 2021. Yes, we were 2016 every 5 years. We would typically see results start to roll out mid 2022.
Mhm.
One thing I would say about that is you're right. A lot of the population data, for example, is 2016. But within this report, we've got a lot of data from 18, 19, and even 2020 when we look at some of the other sources. We were really lucky in working with our consultants to be able to have them tap into a number of sources. So we have BC Stats data, for example, from 2019. We have real estate market data from March 2020, and the Air DNA, for example, is pardon me, I don't want to quote that, but it is from the first quarter of 2020.
So 2022, we'll be looking at revamping this whole,
That's right.
updating the entire
Yeah,
database.
so the legislation that introduced the need for these reports requires that they be updated every 5 years.
Every 5 years.
But one of the great things about our project is that we built in some in-house capacity from the consultants to staff, so that we've got all of the raw data, all of the assumptions in the methodology. As you know, that is so key when we're talking about numbers. What were the assumptions? What's in, what's out? So we've built that into the project. So I think that we have from the staff level in any way, we are quite pleased with the reports that we received. And I think that building on those in future will be an easier job, certainly, than this initial report would have been.
And if somebody can refresh my memory, we did receive provincial grant to help fund this, did we not?
That's
with
correct. We
100,000,
received,
wasn't it?
yeah, you know, I feel very lucky to be able to be mixing up grants right now. We're not often in that position, but we received, as I recall, 105,000 from UBCM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good old UBCM. Yay. Thank you very much. Let's call the question on receipt. All in favor of receipt? That carries. And the recommendation is to receive it and post it to the CVRD website. Okay, on that, all in favor? I am now going to call a very short recess, stretch your legs, and we'll plow on through to the end. Sorry, Amanda.
our motto in bylaw enforcement.
Call this meeting back to order. And we're on item number 5, bylaw enforcement semi-annual report, a report for receipt. And over to CAO.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Amanda Yasinski is here to present her report and answer any of your questions.
Welcome, Amanda. Can you get her mic on your side?
Good morning, through the CAO to the chair. So today I have our semi-annual report from January 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2020. So this report is for information only and goes over some highlights of the reporting period to date. So during this time, 144 files have been opened. That was an increase. We had 101 files to the end of June in 2019. So essentially, we've almost done a full year's worth of caseload in the first 6 months in 2020. This reporting period has shown an increase overall in files, but specifically in noise complaints, as well as files regarding the permanent occupancy of recreational vehicles. During this time, bylaw staff completed 96 patrols of CVRD parks and 100 hours specifically in response to COVID-19. This time was spent primarily through the end of March to early May in response to COVID. During that time, we adjusted our patrols, our shifts. We worked off hours, weekends to accommodate just a different need from the community. And to make sure we were more visible out there. Bylaw staff have also continued to file claims online for unpaid tickets during this time through the Civil Resolution Tribunal Service, and we've had some success with that. We've been 100% successful to date on those as well. During this time, 10 municipal tickets or MTIs were served on a variety of files, and staff also conducted parks patrols for other issues as well and responded to parks complaints during the time that were not COVID related. During the reporting period, there was 144 files opened, as I mentioned, 15 of which were specifically illegal dumping. Overall, illegal dumping reports for the entire CSWM area were at 40, which is a decrease from last year. There was 54 over the entire service area of illegal dumping complaints for this time last year. During this time, we closed 106 files, fielded 392 phone calls related to specific files, and another 307 for just general inquiries. 58 additional calls and inquiries that were directly related to COVID-19. These included complaints and other discussions and referrals with municipalities locally and other agencies. During this time, 983 dog licenses have been sold. Our goal for 2020 for total sales was 1,400. So with our office closed and with the SPCA closed, we've actually done pretty well. We might still be able to get that 1,400 goal. 40 dog barking complaints, 21 aggressive dogs, and 14 dog bites, as well as 71 reports of just dogs at loose or at large were also fielded through animal control. 9 animals impounded and 376 parks and trails patrols conducted by our animal control contractors as well. In addition to these, CVRD bylaw continues to maintain an excellent working relationship with the local municipalities, as well as our external agencies that we work very closely with. I can answer any questions on this report or anything specific if you wish.
Well, thank you very much. That's an astounding amount of work in half a year. And I think Director Hamir is number 1 here.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Amanda. I'm curious about the drop in illegal dumping. That's great news, but I'm wondering if staff have any idea why that is, or
through the chair, the beginning onset of COVID, when when working from home, we had a bit of a spike in complaints received. I think there's a bit of miscommunication and the public not aware that the facilities in the landfill were still open. But since then, it has leveled off. People are out and about more. So there should be more reporting of it. What we've seen is less in our area here and more north of Campbell River. So it's kind of shifted to where those complaints are coming from, as well as the number.
Okay, that's great. And I hope, you know, with the closure of the recycling depot at Country Market, it continues to stay low and that people have patience to just stand in line at the return at depot. Yeah, thanks.
And Director Arbor.
Yes, out of curiosity, because it was been so much of our world and interaction with constituents for the last 4 months. What is there a particular call around COVID? Like, is there the nature of the calls? Are they around social distancing or around businesses that may not be observing? So is there a pattern around the type of calls you have, or they're just all over the map?
Through the chair, initially, it was all about social distancing, all of it. Social distancing in areas, playgrounds that maybe weren't ours, we would pass those on. A lot in our parks, Goose Spit in particular, and then a lot in areas that our Crown Beach is but frequented, so in the Black Creek area as well. Now it shifted specifically to businesses. A lot of the calls we get are businesses that aren't in our jurisdiction, but we do log and track them, both with the municipality and through provincial health, there's a way to track those. We haven't had many for follow-up for us that have actually been in our area, but now it's definitely, I can't remember the last social distancing call I received. It's been primarily questions about businesses reopening and if those are on side with the health orders.
That's great, thank you. And if I can have a follow-up, following with the trend, I guess. Now that it's shifting to businesses, my understanding, and you may correct me, is most businesses are supposed to have a plan that they have around their practices. I understand for each different sector, it may be different. And if constituents have questions, would they be better off calling Island Health? I think they had some people that were doing some type of check on that, or at least that's what the province, I believe, had announced last month. Or are they better off calling our bylaw enforcement here, or what is the best channel to follow?
Yes, through the chair. So depending on the type of business, for service industry, any food service, those are to go to Island Health. If we get them, we'll pass them on for sure.
Okay.
Other types of businesses, we've had a couple golf course complaints or inquiries. Island Health may ask, or the health authority may ask that bylaw assist in doing the first educational, or even to see if the complaint is founded. We've had a few where it's just been maintenance crews. It hasn't been the public. It's just been people in the business, but it hasn't been open for business. They've been renovating or something similar.
Okay.
So the health authority is still the primary, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And by the sounds of it, as you stated earlier, wherever people call, it sounds like the collaboration is really good between the different agencies, and you guys will coordinate who's the best agency to respond.
It's been excellent, actually. Yes,
Excellent is the word you used earlier. I remember that. So that's great news, because that can reduce confusion or for people when whomever they call. So thank you for that.
And this is a semi-annual, so we'll see you again in 6 months. Be interesting to see the comparative between what the last 6 months were and the next 6 months. They're not going to be too much the same, I don't think. So thanks very much. And on receipt, all in favor. Union Bay Improvement District Conversion Study. Seconded. And over to
Thank you very much,
Chair.
Chair and Directors. And James Warren has presented this report for your consideration. It provides a little bit of an update to confirm that this process continues and is ongoing. Director Arbor is part of the working group, along with trustees and staff of the two organizations, as well as Municipal Affairs and Urban Systems, who are doing the work. It is very important that a conversion study be well shared, the information be well shared with the community, with the improvement district and the ratepayers that ultimately would make any decision stemming from it. to support the public engagement process, and recognizing it will be a little more challenged under the current circumstances, we're suggesting that additional funds be made available for that purpose under the feasibilities, and such funds would be paid back by the service in the event a conversion does take place. If you have any questions about that and the process, I'm sure Director Harper and myself can answer them for you.
I'd be disappointed if he didn't answer them. I want a summary. You know, I'm a verbal kind of culture guy, and
Thank you. Yes, the committee has met probably 3 or 4 times by now in the last few months, and I'd say it's been a very functional and collaborative endeavor with UBID and the CVRD, and we have, as you can imagine, our share of challenges, chief among which was COVID, but also various changes like as we're starting to collect information, they are just putting online a brand new water treatment plant, which is a huge achievement. They just completed it a couple of weeks ago. So they also have an election coming at UBID in AGM, which was delayed by COVID. Yeah, just a number of considerations. It felt like the last call, we were like, I don't think we can have more moving parts to this project, but overall it is tracking. And I think there will be some public engagement in early fall, September and October, and towards some kind of decisions being made in November, December sort of time period. So I look forward. I think both parties are learning a lot. And as a sidebar to that, I was really pleased to see, which may be elsewhere in our agenda, but I was really pleased to see it's actually with the water committee, but the water collaboration between Improvement District and the CVRD. So there's, outside the governance to the study, there's also lots of good collaborations happening, which I'm very pleased with. So if there's any questions, they can be directed to myself. James has been the key staff, I think, in a lot of those meetings, and UBID as well. The trustees have been quite engaged. So that is that.
thank you very much, Director. So any questions? Arsina?
Maybe just ask sort of what the next steps are. Well, like once this study is completed, and then depending on the findings, I guess, what would be the next step?
Yeah, so the next stages are to complete the analysis and study, working with the working group on that to ensure that they're satisfied. Then is public engagement, sharing that information with the ratepayers of the Union Bay Improvement District. And then the trustees of the Improvement District themselves must decide on the next steps. Working with the province, what form of public engagement, whether it's a referendum or a decision of the trustees as to whether to convert or not. More than likely, in a case like this, it would be a referendum, but that would be conducted by the Improvement District itself. And ultimately, it is the ratepayers of the Improvement District that decide whether to convert or not. We kind of be mindful of schedules and such. I guess, depending on when all information is complete to the satisfaction of the group, it's possible that a referendum might take place in the fall. If that were the case, I don't think you would see an actual conversion happen before April of next year. Being that it is midway through the year, that might require 2 audits, but better than rushing to a January 1st transition and or waiting a year.
Yeah, we're all held hostage to this pandemic, and things can change in a matter of weeks, but at least it's moving forward steadily. So on receipt, call a question on that. All in favor? And there's a recommendation as well. Move and seconded on the recommendation. Any further questions on that? All those in favor? And that carries. Now, Community Works Fund Status Report for receipt.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. This is a status report that's provided on a regular basis for your information. Kevin Duval is here to answer any questions, and just to make a note that the report was updated to correct some of the numbers as of Friday, but that which is on the agenda is the current version. If you do have any questions, again, Kevin is here to answer them for you.
Yeah, I can go.
Director Arbor.
Thank you. Yeah, that looks good. Thank you. I always look forward to that report. I do. It's a lot of where our capital funds for our rural communities come from, and for very important projects. I just had a general question to staff, whether there is anything in there, any of our projects that have seen significant delays because of COVID or things like that, that are worth highlighting, or whether generally staff feels that we've been managing to keep most of those projects on track. Yeah, that would be my only question, I guess, for today.
Yeah, just I'm looking at Kevin. Nothing jumps to mind from the perspective of Kevin and I with respect to these projects and delays or otherwise from COVID.
Sure. And I see there was a small change for my constituents on Denman that, unless I'm mistaken, I think it used to be called the Denman Island Cross Island Trail, but I see the Denman Island Ferry Trail. Was that changed, or it's just they're just referred differently between our website and our Community Works Fund dollars?
Yeah, I think
they're just called differently. That's great to know, because I do know we are doing the little ferry escalator, the stairs, and I was wondering whether that was specific to that, but no, it's for the whole Cross Island. So thanks for that clarification. That's it from me.
I guess question to staff around, I saw we are getting a lump sum instead of 2 payments from UBCM, and the monies that are kind of coming in, those have all been eyed up for future projects, or is there any leeway in any of those dollars?
Thank you very much, through the chair to the director. So what you see in front of you are the current total of approved projects currently from the Community Works funds. Any of the future year dollars through the end of 2024, we still have no commitments to those. So as you can see right now, total uncommitted funds to this point in time is about 4.3 million. We will have another approximately 3.3 million coming over the next few years. So we will have to make some decisions as to where the balance of that potentially gets committed.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow up to that, since it was brought up, is that 3.3 million figure assuming the regular grant, because they've been doubling it for the last 2 years. So would that become 6.6 if they kept the double, or that's under the existing 10-year agreement, the 3.3?
That would be based on the current funding formula. So because it is unknown whether they would potentially double that, we are going based on the approved allocation confirmation that we have from UBC.
Right, but we can also confirm that we got doubles the last 2 years.
We did 1 year in the past. This year we didn't get a doubling so much as just a doubled up payment.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so because of COVID, they've decided to advance the full year's amount of allocation in one fell swoop. So that 1,029,000 represents the anticipated 2020 payment. It's not a doubling up. It's literally just the 2 installments provided.
They are so sneaky. See, they fooled at least one local government official, because when I saw doubling, I thought they meant doubling the fund. They're just doubling the payment. That's sneaky. Got it. Thank you so much for that clarification. I thought we were on course for doubling those on a permanent basis. I believe our chair is still part of FCM advocating for such a plan. Yes, thank you.
Notice by our bell is 43 o'clock right now.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Well, with that update, I know, we do speak about future like asks from staff and what project ideas are kind of coming down the pipeline. Do we have an idea of when a report like that might be coming from Parks or from Brett?
Certainly, as part of the upcoming financial planning process, we can certainly reach out to the branches, once again, ask them for a request of any potential reports coming down the pike, and certainly advise directors as such.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I do recall that they've changed a little bit of the criteria around the Canada Works Fund now. It's not quite as strict as it once was. But I thought there was something in the works this year again, especially due to the COVID thing, that they're going to change some of the.
We've certainly not heard of any substantive changes to the program as such. I mean,
Yeah.
we are certainly anticipating as we get closer and closer to the 2024 end date of this current contract, that we will be seeing something that kind of advising local governments as to the future of this particular program, but nothing as yet.
It's probably just being advocated at this point. Nothing's happened. Okay. Very good. So we're in the money. So for receipt, on receipt, call a question. All in favor? That carries. And then new business. Discussion about the COVID-19 community protocols for receipt.
I think this was a placeholder when you originally mentioned that you might want to discuss this at the AA. So it's at your discretion. There's not a report or anything from staff.
You have a comment?
No,
Director?
thank you. Yeah, I guess this is the committee protocol. So now I know it's probably tied to the board report as well. That's going forward with all the protocols at the regional district around the COVID measures. And probably people can tell that 3 elected officials from the rural areas are wearing our masks today, which is optional, not mandatory. And yeah, so far I find it definitely a little bit more challenging than usual, but I think I'm getting used to it, and it's going to continue to be a debate in the communities. But no, I did not. I know I had brought up the potential to bring up a motion, but at this point, I think the 3 directors will do as we are doing now, and see how it goes in the foreseeable future. So I do want to want to say thanks to staff for the comprehensive protocol report that's being submitted to the board. I think is very comprehensive and very good for our operations.
Director Demir?
Just a comment, because I've had questions from our APC about meeting in person, and moving forward, our staff considering that as an option for the local area committees.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson, and through the chair to the directors. Yeah, so certainly over the last number of months, as you're aware, the APCs have been meeting via teleconference, and now that we are now open to the public, there is the opportunity to resume in-person meetings. However, at this point, we've suggested to the APCs that we continue to make use of teleconference and video conference to conduct those meetings, simply out of an act of precaution where we can limit interactions between those members. It doesn't restrict us from changing that and opening that up, and certainly Ton and I are meeting with and talking with the chairs later today to discuss general operations of those committees. And so if that's strong feedback we get from them, we'll certainly take that under advisement and consider how we go forward.
Just one more question for me. Yeah, just out of curiosity for staffing, I know I've asked it every 3 weeks, but how much of our staff complement is working from home versus regional district? Are most people back at the office now, or?
It's on a rotational basis, so there's staff that will work both at home and in the office, and that helps us to sort of keep more space available and keep our spread. At one time, at least 50% were at home. I'm thinking probably a third of the staff are at home on any given day or working remotely in some way, shape, or form.
Great. Well, thanks for adjusting. It's been quite an interesting 4 months, and it's good to be back in this building after 4 months.
Sorry, the question for Jake. I think some of the committee members, it seems, either through teleconference are finding frustrating and don't have maybe great access to internet, as we've spoken about earlier in some of the rural areas. So I guess if that option is available to them to come in person, I think I'm not saying that all of them would. In fact, I know some would definitely not want to come in person. But if that can be made available for a few, I think that would be helpful.
To the chair, to Director Hayward, great question. I think the purpose of this today's meeting with the chairs, with all 4 APCs, were just to have that discussion how we can support them as a chair, but also moving forward with the opening of our office. As a staff member, I have been hearing concerns about the lack of internet service where they're located, and then also the difficulties of providing some comments. Some members do prefer actually being in the office instead of phoning in. So this office for staff, we are always here for the meeting just in case if the public does show up. And if the members do prefer to come to the meeting, they're welcome to come. But as Jake mentioned, that we do recommend that if it's feasible and it's working for that member, they should call in. Thank you.
Nope.
It's generating a lot of concern in my area. And it looks like the can keeps getting kicked down the road a little bit. We understand we're in extraordinary circumstances and all that. I'm just wondering where we are with regards to the timeline on that.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll ask Doug DeMarzo to come forward, General Manager of Community Services, to provide you all with an update with respect to the progress on the Merville Fire Hall.
Thank you. Through the chair to the directors. I can say that the Merville Fire Hall is well on its way in the design process. It's really about 3 stages of the process, which is the parcel requirements. And right now we are currently working with Mars on refining the aquatic development permit process on that. So that's looking good. And the remainder of that, aside from the highway access, which we're waiting for civil engineering feedback on from our consultant, the remainder of the parcel requirements look well in hand. On the building requirements, we're hoping to have our final building in mid-August at the latest. And once we get those numbers and those final designs, we'll be looking to legislative services to lead us into the AAP process. But just prior to that, we'll need to review the numbers to ensure they're still within the maximum borrowing amounts and the extent budget that's currently available, which we still feel strongly they will be. That will lead us to an AAP hopefully in late September, depending on the provincial feedback on the process and the staff report and the board's desire of what electoral set process they want to go for. Basically, we're still on track as we anticipated when we started this project in November, with slight delays. to getting the final building requirements, mostly due to sub-consultants on the civil side, but everything else is moving along nicely.
That's great reassuring news. Thank you very much.
Chair, could I have a question? This is to staff. You know, with the Merville Hall electoral scent and potentially curbside garbage recycling pickup electoral scent, would it make sense to roll these together? I don't want to delay one, but I know there is a cost associated with those. Is there a possibility of having more than one at the same time, or is that?
One of the things that we're looking at through legislative services, corporate services in our renewal plan is the idea that alternative approval processes will be scheduled and will be consolidated, because there definitely will be savings with respect to them. So we will look at these two projects from that lens as to whether they can be brought together, but we'll bring that to you as committee members to make that decision, because you may not want to delay one project over the other, but definitely you can compare the potential for delays and the advantages to working together to do them both at the same time.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, thanks so much. I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn in camera. All in favor?